Hey everybody, thank you for joining me for another episode of Total Ramblings. This morning it is Saturday, it's about 11:30 and I have just finished watching the latest episode of Doctor Who. This is episode 5 in this series, I believe. This is called The Story and the Engine, which is a funny sort of title, and it goes without saying, well, maybe it doesn't go without saying, there's going to be some massive spoilers here. So if you haven't seen this episode, or if you don't want to be spoilt by what's happening, then maybe skip this and maybe come back to me later. But please come back to me. Sorry, I'm not Alan Partridge. That would be terrible. Anyway, right. Funny sort of episode this. I've literally just finished watching it, so these are my initial reactions. I don't have a script, I just have notes that I've taken. I think it's fair to say, and I think I can say without contradiction, this has got to be the first ever episode where we just have people of colour. Not a single white Caucasian person in the whole episode, which is interesting. I just merely mentioned that as an aside. So anyway, we start off and we're in a barber's shop, and there is a man having his hair cut in the barber's shop, and he is telling a tale about the Doctor, about when he met the Doctor who helped put out a village fire. And as he's speaking, the words of his stories are being interpreted on a wall or a window in the barber's shop. And as the story finishes, a red light flips to a green light, and there's a suggestion that something needs feeding. Interesting start. We crash into the credits, and basically the Doctor and Belinda are on board the TARDIS, and the Doctor is, Belinda's saying to the Doctor, "You've got to get me home," and the Doctor says, "Well, okay, I'm going to take us to Lagos, Nigeria, where there's my favourite barber shop, but I'm going to get a Vindicator reading," because they're trying to sort of triangulate this position back to this specific date and time on Earth. The Doctor gets the reading. We get that bit of the plot out the way very, very quickly. And the Doctor's talking with Belinda about acceptance, about the fact that the Doctor is now in a black body and that certain people's reactions to him have changed since then. And it's something he has to get used to. But there's a particular barbershop here where he's just accepted. And Belinda kind of empathizes with this. And she says, "Off you go, take all the time you need," and she stays on board the TARDIS. So the Doctor's heading towards his favourite barber shop, and there are signs everywhere saying "Stay back, turn back," and there's posters of missing people all over the walls. And he thinks that's odd. Obviously, being the Doctor, he's not deterred, and he carries on, and he enters the barber shop, where the door ominously locks behind him. And meanwhile, on board the TARDIS, there are all sorts of alarms going off that are ear-piercing to Belinda, and there's red lights flashing, and it's all very strange. And the Doctor discovers he can't leave. And basically, there's a group of people in the barber shop, and they're all the faces from all the missing posters. And basically, they are being forced to have their hair cut and tell stories. And as we've seen, as they tell these stories, they appear on the wall. And as we've seen before, these stories appear to be powering something. So the very nature of the stories is powering some kind of engine, and they are feeding this engine with their stories and their imagination. And their hair is artificially growing, because basically it's only when they're sat in the chair with the blanket and having the clippers that the engine it's a bit surreal, it's a bit strange. Anyway, a lady called Abby calls in and brings them food, which apparently she does every day, and the Doctor kind of recognises her. And they establish that they are travelling. The barber shop is not really a barber shop, as I'm sure you've probably guessed by now. It is something else. It is a barber shop, but it's not a barber shop. They're somewhere and they're travelling. Anyway, the Doctor sits in a chair and kind of against his will, he sort of volunteers and then says no, he doesn't want to. Anyway, he tells a story about Belinda, and we see our mandatory Mrs. Flood appearance because she is in Belinda's story of just Belinda having a regular day as a nurse and saving someone's life, which I'm sure nurses do all the time. My wife's been in hospital for nearly 18 months, and I've seen the work that nurses do. I've spent far too much time in hospitals, so, you know, I've seen how hard they work. Anyway, basically, the Doctor's story appears to flood the engine with power. It fills the batteries, and the whatever it is they're on starts speeding up. Belinda, meanwhile, due to all the alarms and asking the TARDIS to tell her what's going on, she leaves the TARDIS. The Doctor, having told his story and sort of feeling drained of energy now because it's kind of sucked life out of him, if you like, he talks to Omo, the owner of the barber's shop, and he says, You've betrayed me by bringing me here. I thought this was safe. I thought I was in a place that I could call home. And the Doctor endeavours to escape by opening the door with the sonic, and they discover that the barber's shop is on the back of what appears to be a gigantic, massive mechanical spider walking across an endless web, a literal web in space, right? And the barber, who is the one that is forcing people to tell the stories, says, I call it the Nexus. I used to call it the World Wide Web, and then the humans named something much uglier after it. So we've got a bit of social commentary here, if we didn't have already, with our writers and Doctor Who producers basically having another go at the web. Last week we saw them having a go at sort of misinformation and dangerous kind of conspiracy theories online, and, you know, people screaming into the void, and now we've kind of got a bit of a continuance of that. Belinda turns up, and now she's trapped in the barber's shop as well. And the Doctor compares the barber to a troll on the web. So there we go again with our social commentary about modern life, saying he's hiding his identity like a coward. Whereupon the barber says, but I am actually a god. I go by many names. I go by the name Bastet and Loki and all these other different names. And the Doctor and Belinda look at each other and say, what, you're all these people? And he goes, yes, I'm all these people. And they laugh at him, which is quite funny, because the Doctor says, I've met these people and it's not you. He says to the people in the barber shop, he's lying to you. And then he reveals that he is kind of like almost the force behind the gods, because he was the one who was documenting their stories. And he built the Nexus as kind of a repository for they got the stories of the gods. And when they realised they didn't actually need him because the Nexus could run itself, they threw him out. I have to say, there's about a 5-minute period in this episode where we get some massive heavy lifting with exposition dumps. A lot of talking, a lot of people explaining what's going on. I think there might have been a better way that they could have shown this. So, you know, kind of the show don't tell kind of principle. But anyway, the Doctor also is talking with Abby and kind of says, I recognise you. And we get not a flashback, but the fugitive Doctor appears, because this is where the Doctor's met Abby before in a much previous life. So anyone who was hoping that the Timeless Child storyline was going to be erased, I'm afraid is sadly out of luck. I don't personally have a problem with it. But anyway, we see the fugitive Doctor for the first time in years. Anyway, our barber wants to destroy the gods out of revenge. And the Doctor's like, if you destroy the gods, you're going to affect humanity because they are linked together. Anyway, Abby says, well, I'm going to tell a story. And while she's telling a story, she's braiding the Doctor's hair. And she's telling a story about how slaves in the past were forbidden to carry pieces of paper, so instead messages and maps were woven into their hair, braided to their scalp, and that was never checked, and that's how they were able to escape. So the Doctor braids basically a map, if you like, into the Doctor's hair, and he's able to find the story engine at the center of all of this. And he kind of overloads it by telling it an endless story. And the endless story is himself. His endless story is 6 words, which is, I'm born, I die, I'm born. And essentially, then we get flashbacks to basically all the Doctors appearing on the screen, on the windows. And as I say, a never-ending story. And this overloads the story engine with never-ending power. And to cut a long story short, everybody escapes and the spider explodes. And Omo, who was the barber, kind of gives the keys to the barber shop to the barber. Abby leaves and everybody's happy. Not really much more to say about this. Funny sort of story. I was starting to wonder whether, the barber might be the master of the land of fiction or something, which we saw in The Mind Robber, Patrick Troughton's story. I was wondering if it was something to do with that, because there's been some talk that, maybe he might appear, because we've had the sort of pantheon of gods kind of thing going on in Doctor Who lately. I did wonder whether, when the barber said, I am all these gods, I thought, okay, so he's one of the pantheon. But no, he's kind of like the guy sitting behind them all. Definitely an interesting story. Not something, it's totally different, I think, to everything we've seen so far this season. I think it deserves another watch. I think it might be slightly divisive. What I will say is at the end, at the sort of denouement, we had some very sort of bombastic music. And for once they've got, and I've said this through the whole series, they've got the music mix right. In past Doctor Who, there was a possibility that that music by Murray Gold would have completely blown out all the audio coming out of people's mouths and the speech and the talking, and you wouldn't have understood. They've got it dialed down. You can still hear the bombastic music, but it's not overblowing the talk and the speech. It's a very bright episode, lots of oranges and yellows and reds. Obviously the clothing, very, very colourful. I'm an old white guy, right, from the UK. So I will leave it to experts to determine if there's any sort of cultural stereotyping going on here. Did they take some shortcuts in their interpretation and representation of the Nigerian community? I don't know. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I don't know. I'll leave it for others to decide if that's the case. I'm not an expert, but I thought it came across as very positive. And like I say, this has got to be the first Doctor Who episode where every single person in it is a person of colour, without exception. Including the fugitive Doctor. So, yeah, there you go. So, the story and the engine, a different kind of Doctor Who episode. One that I think provides a lot of thought. The ending, perhaps slightly too trite. It kind of reminded me of some of the weaker Matt Smith episodes. I'm thinking of the one where I can't think of the name of it now. The one where they're worshipping the sun or the planet and it turns into a face and they sing a song. It reminded me a bit like that. Do you know what I mean? I can't really explain what I mean by that, but ending was a little bit perhaps too neat and tidy. But whatever. It was good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching any Doctor Who, really, even if it's off. This wasn't off, it was just different, right? So those are my initial thoughts about the episode. A funny sort of episode, particularly at the start when you don't know what the hell's going on. Someone's telling a story and there's kind of images and illustrations appearing, but I thought it was quite well done. Anyway, yeah. So let me know what you think about this episode. I've no doubt I'll have more to think about as time goes on, but I've literally just finished watching it, and it's a lot of kind of food for thought. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Total Ramblings. Please do all the usual YouTubey stuff, like, subscribe, share, comment, vote me down, hate me, do whatever you like, and hopefully I'll see you in the very next episode. Bye bye.